Black Ice TV. This is wisdom, knowledge and information wherever you need to find it. Now we're going to be talking to the big and wonderful man, Onyeka, who's given us the wonderful book and a wonderful lecture. Anyway, we just want a quick one and ask you like how you've began to come towards this information that you're giving to the public.
Okay, well, first thing is that this information, sometimes it calls to you, you know,
Yeah.
because you see images, representations, which don't match reality, and something inside of you says that there's more. Or, as you begin to read widely, you begin to see that there are gaps missing in the narrative that's been said to you. So, should we start again?
No, just continue, just flow it through. Continue. Let him go.
So if you read the text widely, and you begin to investigate core English text, then you begin to see in those English texts representations of Africans and references to Africans. So one doesn't need to necessarily, in the first instance, make recourse to something special, right? One just needs to study the information properly. And then when one studies that information properly, you find in that information references, and then those references lead on to something else. Right? And if you're diligent, then you can find lots of things that have not been spoken about before, right? And nobody's spoken about before. And then when you discover it, if anyone can discover it, you know, like Christopher Columbus discovering it, right? But when you do discover it, suddenly you wonder why that narrative has not been explained. Because it opens up everything else.
I want to ask you a question. Because you are from West African descent, as I can see from your name, Onyeka.
No, that name has been given to me.
Oh, it's been given to you. So where would you say your parents?
That's a long
story.
Yeah.
But anyway, when you do the history stuff, because I seem to be seeing that it's a lot of references coming from West Africa.
Yeah. Because we have more information from West Africa. Because the West African people had settled civilizations which kept records. So we have West African records. And those records from Timbuktu or Songhai or ancient Mali or ancient Ghana, we can then cross-reference. And the records of the kings of those areas, we can cross-reference with other records. Like today we were talking about Prince Nyambana. Some of those records are found in Sierra Leone in the 18th century. So we can cross-reference what is written here with what is written there. Right? So that's why with West Africa. And because West Africa, geographically, is the next port of call, right, after North Africa to Europe. Whereas Southern and Eastern Africa is further on the route going round.
Because you know, like they mostly say, like with the Moors and all that, they're rooted out of
West Africa.
Morocco, and they've rooted up Tunisia.
No, they came from West Africa originally.
But then with the Spanish people say that they were as dark as something. So, and I kind of looked at it and I said that, they must have come from something like Senegal and things like that.
I mean, I think the first thing is to do, when we talking about any subject, is to talk about how the people at that time wrote about that thing. Not how we now interpret it. Because we might interpret it many different ways because 21st century mentality. Right? So if people do the research and look at how people at the time wrote and thought about a given subject, then we can understand that subject clearer. So if we're talking about African presence, say in this country, we just need to talk and think and understand what people wrote about then. Not what we now might understand or think. Right? And when we do that, we find lots of very interesting things which shake our perceptions or preconceptions. Even those people who think that they know. Right? And sometimes this narrative is confusing for people because, number one, when people begin to get an understanding, the first thing that they understand is about slavery, right? And then they understand about ancient Egypt. So these are the two reference points. One is slavery and one is ancient Egypt. But what about the middle thing? Is there nothing else? Is it only ancient Egypt?
The puzzle that comes out.
Is it only ancient Egypt where we're supposed to be kings and queens? And is it only slavery where we're supposed to be property? Right? And then in that confusion, we're supposed to find some sense. But not everybody was a king or a queen. And not everybody was a slave. Right? Most people were something in between for most of the time. Right? And that narrative needs to be explained. But unfortunately, when you begin to explain that narrative, then people say, well, you're trying to say that slavery wasn't evil, wasn't a horror. right? But slavery was a horror, right?
Okay.
It was a crime against the soul of humanity. I don't deny that, right? But we have to contextualize it correctly. Not every African in England or in Europe or in North Africa, or in Africa, or in North America, or South America, was a slave for all of the time. And many of those people were never enslaved.
Okay.
Right?
Well, do you think it was, one thing, do you think it was it banned in this country, or was would they allow the slavery?
Yes, that's two questions.
No, I don't want to answer them. I'm trying to.
Do you mean when? What? When are you talking about?
I'm talking about like the 1500s, like the presence, as you said, that there was a lot of Africans.
There was no the law was not clear at all in the 16th century.
It wasn't clear.
There was no laws to enforce slavery.
Yeah.
In the 16th century.
Because you know how
in this country, there was no laws in the 16th century to enforce slavery. Right. In fact, there were cases which said that slavery could not exist for various reasons, probably because it was related to torture or abuse or whatever, and that they felt that that kind of behavior might then flow into English-born citizens. So, therefore, in the 16th century, that doesn't mean that some Englishmen in the 16th century weren't involved in slave trading practices abroad. What it does mean is that in England, it was difficult to enforce slavery.
Okay. Now, anyway, just quickly get to this book, because everybody should have this book.
Right, yes.
And just give us a quick lowdown on this book.
Well, this book is after about 22 or 23 years research on the African presence in Tudor England. That's between 1485 to 1603. And it's about how that population existed, why they existed, what they did, right, and how they were part and parcel of Tudor society from 1485 to 1603, and how they influenced the development of Tudor society and carried with them the culture that came from the Iberian Peninsula. And that's a story that's never told, because when we hear about Tudor England, we hear it's an all-white narrative. And this shows that it's not an all-white narrative, that in fact Africans, Moors from Spain, from the Iberian Peninsula and elsewhere, were part and parcel of that narrative.
All right, then. It was nice speaking to you.
Great. Thank you.
And we'll
Sorry
speak
that it's
again.
so short.
And we'll speak again.
Where is he? Yeah, good.
So we'll talk. Make sure you buy this book.